So next point is how the compiler, what I told compiler changes our class code. Compiler changes our class code. How? So it is a very new point. So how the compiler changes our class code. Suppose I will write class example2. Suppose, and this is my suppose curly bracket begin and curly bracket end. Okay, curly bracket begin and curly bracket end. Then how the compiler? So it will how the at the time of compilation. So how the compiler changing this class? So at the time of compilation. So what the compiler is adding? So mindful listen and you see class example 2. The point number 1, you remember. So first the compiler check whether the class is extending from other class or not. Extends. It is a concept of inheritance. There is a superclass, there is a subclass concept. The first compiler will check whether the class example2 extends from other class or not. If not, if yes, there is no problem. Compiler will write same thing. So here example2 simply we have written there is no extends keyword that we have used. So if the class example2 not extending from other class, so at the time of compilation what the compiler will write, you remember class name example2 extends okay, extends java dot lang package name is object class. This you remember, every class is the child class of object class, or you can say object class is the parent class of all user defined and all inbuilt classes. All you remember, all by default, every class by default, every class is the child class of object class. So you have written class example2, but what the compiler is writing, class example2 extends java.lang.object class. Okay, now then again what the compiler will check. Is there here what you have written? You have written class name, you have written class name curly bracket begin and curly bracket end. Okay, so again the compiler will check whether this class example2 having constructor or not. So we have class example2 curly bracket begin and curly bracket end. So nothing within curly bracket begin and end, nothing we have written. So if your class having no constructor, you remember the compiler will add a default constructor. Compiler will add a default constructor, you remember. So again I am repeating. So if your class having no constructor, at the time of compilation, the compiler will add a default constructor. If your class having constructor, then there is no need to add a default constructor by the compiler. If the class having no constructor, the compiler will add a default constructor. Then next point. Here again the compiler will check.
Hello.
Yes.
I
Any
think
question?
the name should be example 2.
Example to
Yes. Example 2.
constructor name and class name.
Yes. Example 2, because constructor name, class name must be same. So then what again the compiler will check what? Is there any super call or not? Currently, I told every class is the child class of object class. That means object class is the super class. Example 2 is the subclass. So every child class can access all super class properties. Yes, Rakesh, yes. So compiler will check any super call or not. Okay, we have not written. We have written simply class name, curly bracket begin, curly bracket end, nothing. So if we have not written, then compiler will add super call to access all the super class properties. This is compiler is adding for this. So this is case number 1. In case 1. Yes. Okay, so first point what we knew, we knew what is null. Secondly, we knew what is auto boxing and auto unboxing. Now the third question is going on. So how the compiler changing our class code, and in case number 1, we have a class, name of the class is example 2 and nothing statement, no statement that we have written within curly bracket begin and end, nothing. But when we are compiling this, how the compiler is adding. Okay, then my second example, my second case number 2. Case number 2. Okay, same point. Suppose I will write, suppose class example 2. Suppose I will write example 2. Okay, I will write class example 2. One constructor, suppose one parameterized constructor, suppose one parameter, suppose I will write, let int fee, suppose. Then suppose I will write system.out.println, suppose hi. Suppose I have written this. Now when we will compile, at the time of compilation, the same point currently we studied. So every class is the child class of object class. So class example 2 extends what the compiler will add, java.lang.object class. Okay, now if your class having a constructor, then compiler will not add any default constructor. No add any default constructor. Simply since you have a constructor, example 2 int p, then here the compiler will check, is there any super call or not? So there is no super call. Simply the compiler will add super call. Okay, then one statement. Already we have system.out.println, suppose hi. Suppose this is another case. This is case number 2. If your class having constructor, then compiler never add constructor. But inside the constructor, again compiler will check, is there any super call? If not available, then the compiler is adding a super call. So case number 3, I will go to case number 3. That is very important. I hope everybody is writing, otherwise you take a screenshot. I will go to new file actually. So case number 3, suppose okay, so I will go to new file. Suppose class, let example 2. This is example2.java. Suppose let class, suppose another class, suppose sample extends, suppose extends, let example2. Suppose. So example2 is a super class, sample is a subclass, or you can say example2 is a parent class or sample is a child class. Okay, so now suppose I will declare an instance variable int x, or you can say non-static variable, the variable which is declared inside a class, that is called as instance variable. That is called as instance variable. Okay, so then one constructor, suppose I will call example2 constructor, suppose. Okay, so here I will write int p, suppose. Okay, otherwise suppose here, so I think you will be confused. Let it suppose I will take a constructor, so let it sample, it is a parameterized constructor, and you know, in case of parameterized constructor context, instance variable equals to local variable. Instance variable equals to local variable. And this is a constructor. One constructor I have defined. Then there is a normal method. Suppose I have defined. Let method name is m1. Okay, let m1 method I have defined, and one statement. Suppose system.out.println. Suppose x, system.out.println x. Okay, so this is my program. Okay, so now when this source code will compile, how the compiler is changing. So at the time of compilation, so what the compiler will do. So at the time of compilation, what the compiler will do. See first, so okay, so class example2, so the compiler will check class example2 for this. So already we have started class example2 extends java.lang.object class. So regarding this already we have known, so there is no need to explain, just I am telling you about class sample. Just to see, already class sample, the class sample that have extended from example2. You remember, when the compiler check if a class is extending from other class, so there is no need, the compiler will extend again from object class. So simply, so same line it will stay. Class sample extends example2. Now we have written a variable that is called as instance variable. Again, the compiler checked there is a constructor. If a constructor is available inside a class, there is no need to add a default constructor by the compiler. So constructor, one parameterized constructor int p. So first of all, the compiler will check is there any super call or not. So compiler will add super call. Currently we studied, we knew. Then x equals to p we have written. So x equals to p, x is instance variable, p is a local variable, or p we can say it is a parameter. You remember, the instance variable compiler will add this dot x equals to p. So this is a compiler will add, this is a keyword which directly refers to the current object, Object is a memory. That object contains always a class property. So we can say int x, x is the class property. An object is an instance of a class. So since it is called as x is instance variable. So the variable for preceded or the variable identified by this keyword using dot operator, that variable explicitly what identified as instance variable. You remember, if you have instance variable and when that variable you are using, so at the time of compilation for fully identification of instance variable, the compiler will add this keyword. Okay, then so we will come to the method void m1 m1 method I have defined. So what I have written, system.out.println x, that is compiler will add this dot x. So in this way compiler changing our source. Everybody got clarity? Give a response.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So I hope it is a new point. I hope everybody enjoyed. So how the compiler is adding our class code. If the class not extending from other class, then compiler will add at that time java.lang.object class. Point number 1. If the class having no constructor, the compiler is adding a default constructor. Inside the constructor, if you have no supercall, then compiler is adding supercall. And all whatever you have the instance variable, then at the time of compilation, the compiler is adding this keyword. Okay, so this is our third point. How the compiler changing our source code. Okay, then we will go to the next point. Everybody got the clarity, and I hope everybody is enjoying.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.